Alrighty, so the first step is how do you want your Cessna to be? Now, we all know the Cessna 172 from A2A is high detailed. Lots of stuff modeled. PMDG, a general aviation aircraft right here. I hate drawing comparisons to PMDG, by the way, but whatever. So I've configured my Cessna the way I like it, which is the RG24 15M battery, air track tires, flap seals, gear fairings, and the 172S prop. So that's how I like my plane. Now I'm going to assume you have your plane configured the way you want. Now as far as the cockpit, I like to use the standard avionics with the GPS map on the window. We all know A2A has given us the option of having the GPS 400 or no GPS at all. I like the 295 map GPS, which means this aircraft is not rated for RNAV approaches. It can do VOR approaches, it can do ILS approaches, cannot do RNAV. So if I wanted to shoot an RNAV approach with this airplane, I'd have to have the integrated GPS 400. You can also use the Reality XP GPS, but I'm not going to get into that. So the aircraft is configured the way it spawns, minus me changing a few things, mostly just seat position and opening the doors. This is not how most people leave their Cessnas 172s when they park them. In fact, a flight school I went to, there was one big condition change. That right there. You can push that in or pull it out. The real world checklist here doesn't have pulling that out as a part of the shutdown items. It's in the items for shutdown on the A2A 172 somewhere. I know it said it somewhere, but you can actually leave it in. It doesn't really matter. The only thing that does is that shuts off the fuel flow before it gets to the final filter and strainer and the engine driven fuel pump. So that's the final link in the chain before you get to those. That's really all it does. And when your mixture is at full cutoff back here, then the fuel going to the engine's cut. So it's not really like that matters. That's for if you have a fuel problem, a fuel fire, or an engine fire, or anything like that, where you want to isolate fuel from the engine. That's what that's for. Or one of my instructors one time was actually straining fuel from the 3 strainers underneath the engine cowling. One of them got stuck. And what do you do when the strainers get stuck and you're leaking fuel all over the ramp? You jump in the cockpit and you yank that out. That'll shut the fuel flow off to the strainers. So that's what that's for. You can push it in or leave it out. It's up to you. It really doesn't do anything. So as far as my aircraft, it's set the way I like. I got it set for generally how I would leave an airplane at a parking spot overnight, minus the tie downs. Tie downs really depend on the parking spot itself. Not every spot has tie downs. So I'm just parked here on a hard surface with some wheel chocks and a parking brake set. Alright, now I like to have the left yoke visible and the left yoke gone and the right yoke visible so I can reach these switches easier. So for pre-flight operations in the Cessna 172, first thing we need to do is check our weight and balance. This is the weight and balance thing in the A2A 172. Pretty sure you know how it works. Let's just say for today's flight, it's just going to be me and Heidi for our passenger. Now, we filled the tanks up, but there is no fuel service at this airfield. So in order to fill the tanks up here, we have to fly the plane to another airport, fill them up, and then fly them back. So, or we could put the fuel in a gas tank and bring it here, fill the plane up ourselves. But, so I took 2 gallons out of both tanks to simulate the trip from an airport with fuel. So the thing with weight and balance is you want to make sure you don't go over the maximum takeoff weight. See, I threw these people in the back. Right now we're at 2,352 pounds. Let me pull out my performance charts here. I think it's 2,500 pounds is the maximum you can have. So I'm going to go 2,500 pounds is the most you can load into this airplane. After that, you have to take either fuel or you have to take weight because you're overloaded at that point. Throwing one more passenger in the back puts us well over that. So let's put the female back there. That didn't quite put us over 25, but it's still red. So let me find out just what the load is. Anyway. We could put... hold on. There it went. Okay, so 2,450 pounds is the most you can load into this airplane. After that, you're overweight. You can tell that when the total weight down here goes red. Let's take the baggage out. So we're well below that. So we have a total 49 gallons of fuel, 24.5 in each tank. 260-pound pilot. Yes, I am fat. And Heidi is 135 pounds. Alright, so we got the plane loaded. The next thing we want to make sure is CG. They don't seem to have a CG calculation on here, but I'm not going to get into CG calculation. You can look that stuff up on your own if you want to know about it. But you just want to make sure the airplane isn't going to go out of control once you take off. The best way to do that is to use the default fuel and payload. I'm going to check it real quick, and we are within CG limits, but Fraps did not capture that. It never captures those dialogues. So I'm going to tell you we are within CG limits. The CG is a bit far forward, but it's still well within the limits. If I were to do the calculations, which I ain't got time to do right now, so we probably have a CG of around 20%. Alrighty, so let's get on to the other pre-flight stuff. So now we've done weight and balance, we've done the pre-flight planning, we've checked the weather. All to do now is set the airplane up. Now we got to do a pre-flight inspection. Pre-flight inspections in real life are done on the first flight of the day. And usually at flight schools, every flight of the day does the pre-flight inspection because you're trying to teach. But for actual operations, multiple flights in the day with the same aircraft, they do a full pre-flight on the first flight of the day, and then every flight after that is just a brief walk-around inspection, which is an abbreviated version of the full pre-flight. Alright, so the first step in pre-flighting is to hop in the airplane and get set up the way you want. Real life, what I like to do is stand next to the cockpit at a door, plug in my headset, set it aside, and move all my stuff around, get everything situated the way I like it. Most airplanes I've in have a little caddy down here with cup holders and useful stuff like that. So I put all that down in there. Now we need to set the aircraft up. We want to do the cabin stuff. So to get this started, now these flows that I do and these checks that I do don't follow the recommended procedures from A2A. I do things a little bit differently because I do things the way I was taught to fly the airplane in real life. So just bear with me. Don't yell at me for being different. This is just how I like to do it. First thing, ditch that control lock. Second, battery on. Turn all the lights on and the pitot heat. Then avionics. Flaps to full. Fuel to both. Make sure the avionics come on. At this point, while you're waiting on the flaps, you need to watch them. Make sure they both come down at the same time and at the same rate. The reason being is you don't want one flap going down faster than the other. That's bad. Now, while we're on the outside view, we want to check, make sure all the lights are working. Landing and taxi lights working. I'll flash the landing light. Nav lights are coming on. Strobe lights are coming on. And the rear navigation light is coming on. Now, note the beacon is not coming on. That's not a failure in the airplane. That has something to do with DirectX 10. I don't know. But whenever I turn DirectX 10 on, that beacon light just straight refuses to come on. Alright, we can turn the master off now. So beacon light just does not like to come on DirectX 10. I don't know why. Next thing we need to do is the pre-flight operations. So we've done cabin. We got everything set up here the way we need it. Next is the left wing. We want to remove the pitot cover and touch the pitot tube. That light should turn red. If it turns blue or any other color, that means the pitot tube heat was either not on long enough or is not working. So that turned red, pitot tube heat is working. Next thing we want to do is lock the baggage door. It's closed and locked. Okay, right here we want to remove the tie down if it's tied up. We want to check the hinges, the screws, cotter pins, and this static strap on both sides of the wing. Or both sides of the horizontal stabilizer and elevator, sorry. So what we're looking for here is make sure the cotter pins are in the bolts like they should be. And we're also looking to make sure the bolts are there. There's no obvious damage and the strap is connected. Next thing we want to check is the straps that, or the cords that deflect the controls, the hinges and cords. They have wires and cotter pins holding the bolts in. Make sure everything there is good and working. Next is the trim tab. Give it a little bump. Make sure it's wiggling around like it should. Now, one thing they didn't model, but you want to do in a real-life Cessna 172 is take the elevator, which is at full down deflection when it's just sitting there like that. You want to move it with your hand slowly, up and down, full deflection. What you're looking for is to make sure there's nothing blocking the elevator. And one thing I like to do is move it full down and sort of put a tip of your finger between the trim tab and the elevator and then slowly bring the elevator up, and the trim tab should start to put pressure on your finger. If it doesn't, then something's wrong. Alright, so that's the elevator. You also want to do that with the rudder. Full deflection. Make sure nothing's blocking it, nothing's catching it. Alright, now with the flap. Give it a bit of a wiggle. Make sure it's on its tracks and not broken. Next, you want to make sure, visually check that it's on its tracks, that the tracks are not damaged. Now, these are Fowler flaps. They have flap seals in them, but it's not being shown right here. This rod right here pushes the flaps along the track, and the track is what lowers the flaps down. So, you want to make sure that rod is not bent. That rod can become bent if you deploy the flaps at too high an airspeed. 110 knots is maximum flap 10 speed. Anything above that, and you pretty much guaranteed to break your flaps if you try to deploy them. So, I have seen these rods get broken before in real life. Someone tried to deploy their flaps too high in airspeed, and it bent the rod. That rod is pretty strong, by the way. It takes a lot of force to bend it. I've never put it on a hydraulic press, but I know you can't bend it with your bare hands. So you want to make sure that is not bent. Now, they don't show it here. What you actually want to do is come back, if I can position the camera, come back behind it and physically look at it from behind the flap, going in there, making sure there's no obvious bends. Next part, wingtip. Check the wingtip and the lights. You want to go full deflection of the ailerons, make sure they're moving like they should. And you want to check the hinges that hold the ailerons on and its deflection rod. Alright, remove this tie down here. You also want to run and visually inspect the leading edge of the wing. No bumps, dents, or dings. Alrighty, check the tire for proper inflation and check that the valve is there and covered. The way you would do that in real life is you'd open that door and check it. Sometimes the valve's hard to find, but you should be able to see it somewhere. Alright, we'll siphon a little bit of fuel out of here, make sure there's no debris in it. Sorry. Next, we'll climb up on top and visually check the fuel. Fuel gauges in these GA airplanes do not have to be accurate unless the tanks are empty. So when the tanks are empty, the gauges have to indicate they're empty. Any other time, they can show whatever. How's that for a regulation? That's what the FARs say. So we visually inspect the fuel tanks to make sure of the amount of fuel we have. Cessna fuel gauges are notorious for indicating the wrong amount of fuel. Trust me, I know this. They're almost never right. So they actually, a lot of times the planes I flew, they under-indicated about 5 gallons. So we have 25 gallons here. We can tell that because the blue line comes all the way up to the 25. Next part, we want to check the oil. We're looking for here the amount of oil and the quality of the oil. The oil is clean, and we have 7 quarts, roughly 7 quarts, probably just below. So we have the 6 quart mark, 8 quart mark, halfway is 7 quarts, and we're just below halfway. So probably about 6.8 quarts. Another thing you want to look at, although it's not modeled here, is the oil filter. You would actually pop open this cowling here, this little door, and when you look down towards the engine, you can see the oil filter, and when the oil filter has the proper amount of torque on it, it should have the label visible. The oil filters have a label on them that show information like the date the oil was changed, next time the oil needs to be changed, and stuff like that. So you want to look at that, make sure that you have good oil. And another thing you want to do is just visually inspect the engine while you're looking in there, making sure everything's good. Alright, now about the oil. For cross-country flights, you're going to want to have 7 to 8 quarts. 7 is the gold number for cross-country flights. Local area flights, like we're doing today, you can get away with just 6 quarts, but you never want to have less than 6 quarts of oil. However, here's a fun little note. If you have an oil leak, the engine can run as low as 2 quarts of oil. The IO360 engine they put in the Cessna 172s can successfully run and cool the engine during normal flight operations with just 2 quarts of oil. That doesn't mean you want to run the engine that low. That's just a useful thing to know. If you have an oil leak, you can get it as low as 2 quarts before you start having problems. Alright, so you always want to have at least 6 or 7 for long cross countries. Today we're local area, so 6 quarts is fine. Alright, there's 3 strainers down here. You want to check the fuel there. Now this is the last stop the fuel makes before it goes to the engine-driven fuel pump and the engine itself. So you want to make sure this fuel is clean because this is the fuel you're going to be starting the engine with and your initial taxi. Also, while you're down here, you would flick the exhaust pipe. There should be an audible ding, and you want to make sure it's a bit of a high-pitched ding. A lower-pitched ding means you have damaged exhaust pipes. You also want to check strut extension and nose gear, tire inflation, and tread. Strut extension should be 3 fingers. You should be able to fit 3 of your fingers between the nose wheel and the engine cowling. We got good strut extension here. The reason you check that is when the plane is airborne, gravity pulls that wheel down and you have maximum strut extension, which disconnects the nose wheel from the rudder controls, meaning the nose wheel will not turn while you're in flight. That way you don't have some crazy drag coming from the nose wheel. However, on the ground, if you land too soft or with too much back pressure, or if there's too much air or hydraulic fluid in the strut itself, it's possible you have too much strut extension on the ground and have no nose wheel steering during ground operations, which is bad. So you want to have good strut extension. Good strut extension. You also don't want to have too less. Too less means you need air, and the nose wheel is going to be taking a lot of bangs and dings from the weight of the engine hitting it. So that strut cushions the blow of vibrations and holes in the ground with the engine on top of it. Alright, right here, you want to check the airplane first. Make sure it's relatively level with the ground. not level, but level with the ground. Well, it needs to be level. You don't want it leaning too far one way or the other. But it's important that it's sitting relatively level with the ground. That way you know you don't have broken main gear struts or underinflated tires, which you should check the tires themselves. You also want to check and make sure the prop has no visible damage, no cuts, dents, or dings, and overall condition of the airplane. Now here you're checking air filter and air intakes. Birds love to build nests in these. This is especially true with airports like this, which are out in the wilderness. You see once we get airborne that in fact, when you do pattern work at this airfield, it's really easy to lose sight of the runway due to these trees. So you really takes your skill. A lot of Kentucky windage when flying at these country airfields like this. And you want to watch out for critters. Alright, one other thing that I've seen a lot of, I personally don't do this, but I've seen flight instructors do it, is my first flight instructor liked to, making sure the mags and fuel and electrical was off, he'd like to grab the prop by the root here at the spinner and sort of just gently pull the prop towards him. And what that does is it brings the prop and the crankshaft inside the engine towards you a little bit. There's a little bit of play in them because when they heat up during operations, they expand. And they tend to cool down and contract and stay where they were when they expanded. So you pull them out just a little bit. You'll hear a little ding. You won't actually feel or see it coming out, but you'll hear a ding in it. And that gives it just enough space to work with when it heats up and expands. Okay, what you're looking for here is the static port. This little thing right here provides static air pressure to the instruments. You really want to make sure this is working. Some models of the Cessna 172 have a second static port back here behind the cargo door. This particular one doesn't. So you only have one static port to work with. Now, we want to make sure there's nothing blocking that hole. Insects love to build nests in there. So definitely make sure nothing blocking that hole. You do not want to blow onto that hole though. You could damage the instruments. Next is just repeat fuel over here. We have 25 gallons, just slightly below. So it's indicating just below 25, so we'll say 24 gallons. You always want to round down when you're counting your fuel. Unless you're planning, then you round up. Okay, same thing over here. Check the fuel quality. Run your hand along the leading edge. Check and make sure there's no damage. Remove the tie-down strap if it's there. Okay, the stall horn. This little slot here is the stall horn. The way it works is off of suction. As the airplane's wing begins to stall, the center of lift will move forward on the wing. This creates suction and lower pressure on the wing. So when air is blowing into that stall horn slot, the horn is not active. The second the center of lift moves too far forward as the wing becomes stalled, it will start pulling air out of that slot. That sucking air coming out of the slot is what activates the stall horn. So you want to make sure there's nothing blocking that slot. You can actually look up into it and check and make sure. One procedure I have seen Cessna recommend is actually kiss the airplane and suck air out of that slot with your mouth. I don't recommend that because God, if there is something in there, you're gonna eat it. So they do sell. I see Sporty sells a little suction cup you can buy for that purpose, but it's not needed. You can just look in there and visually check it, because the horn will work as long as there's suction. It's just basically just a piece of paper. The second thing is this vent right here. This is in the fuel tank and allows air to get into the fuel tank as fuel drains out of the tank. So what we're looking at here is you want to make sure this is straight, not bent, and not blocked or clogged. And over here, just check the wingtip, check the aileron hinges, and again, Make sure you got full deflection on the aileron. When you bank left, the left aileron should point up. When you bank right, left aileron should point down, and conversely on the right aileron. You really want to make sure of that because, you know, maintenance people are human. They can make mistakes. You don't want to get in the air and found out he cross-connected your controls. So you have to so to turn left, you have to turn the yoke to the right. You don't want that to happen. That has happened before in real life. Not to me, but I have read that particular scenario. Again, check the flap here. And also look down there like we did with the other one. Check its tracks and its push rod. That's pretty much it. That is pre-flight operations for the Cessna 172. Alright, we've checked the weather, we've decided on our flight, we've checked weight and balance, we've pre-flighted the aircraft, we are ready to go. So for the next video, it's going to be startup and short field operations. So, see you then. The GPS reads one leg, which is your actual distance across the ground from the VOR, but a DME is slant range, or basically the hypotenuse. If you can think of the triangle, one leg is your altitude, the other leg is your distance from the station, then DME is the hypotenuse.